Most third-person shooters are designed to push your instincts. This newest IP, Pragmata, commands the same spatial awareness, quick reflexes, and fluid maneuvers as the genre's mainstays. But instead of pure instinct, it demands that you lean on intellectual judgment, too. Here, in this upcoming sci-fi action-adventure, a game which looks like your typical shooter on the surface, you'll adopt a combat system which asks you to slow down your thinking, even if everything else speeds up. At its core is a dual-character system that refuses to let either side carry the other. Armored spacefarer Hugh brings firepower, but without companion Diana's hacking, his bullets may as well be rubber. The two are so intertwined, in fact, that neither feels functional without the other. And because every encounter unfolds in real time with no freeze frames or slow-mo, you're forced to multitask under constant, sometimes crushing pressure. Now look, Hugh and Diana's aim hack destroy combat loop is not a gimmick. While encounters follow an ever-recycling rhythm, lock onto an enemy, initiate a hack, expose their weak points, then capitalize with gunfire, Pragmata is also set to test your nerve, your dexterity, and your brain power before every pull of the trigger. This shooter wants you to think. So forget running and gunning, as Pragmata makes that impossible. You see, as enemies' shield and armor make standard gunfire ineffective, you'll need to bypass defenses before opening fire. And to do this, Diana's grid-based hacking interface will reveal nodes which you'll use the face buttons on your controller to channel through, where extending routes through every object in the grid yields longer vulnerability windows or opportunities for Hugh to unleash greater damage. But the longer that you stand your ground committing to one enemy, the risk of others closing in increases. Your opponents are always on the move at full speed. So the question is, do you push for maximum damage or settle for safety and reposition? It is a simple loop in principle, but again, you're making these calculations in real time. In practice, you're aiming, repositioning, and managing threats as Hugh while simultaneously solving puzzles as Diana. Their inputs overlap, so it's remarkable that the gameplay does not feel overwhelming. Cool-headed focus, yes, but rarely do enemies feel impenetrable. Now, to be clear, Pragmata favors balance between each of its controllable characters. Through build customizations, you can lean heavily into hacking if you like, even to the point of outpacing traditional gunplay. But the game's design constantly nudges you to utilize both, with depth coming from how these two systems feed into each other. Hacking, you see, isn't just contained to enemies. Missiles can be redirected, traps disabled, locked doors bypassed, and entire security systems shut down. Diana's hacking toolkit expands the further into the game's lunar base that you go to, with collectible nodes unlocking abilities like multi-target hacks, faster shield breaks, and higher damage output. Quickly, node hacking becomes the game's strategic backbone, and through loadouts, customizations, and upgrades, this part of the system begins to excel in experimentation. But what do you do if enemy units can block Diana's hacks? These enemies arrive, and they will directly interrupt your flow, requiring you to blast away at their defenses before Diana can even lock in. In these moments, you're using Hugh as a battering ram, stripping away an opponent's shell and exposing their circuitry for Diana to rewire, which then brings Hugh back into the fray. It's an extra step, but one that reinforces the need to think on your feet just to survive. For his part, Hugh packs 4 weapon types that are introduced as quickly as Diana's expansive hacking abilities. Grenade launching types are ideal for crowd control, while long-range shockwaves allow you to pick off enemy weak points before Diana even needs to get involved. The stasis net and decoy generator are all about buying valuable time, freezing enemies that are trapped in its web, or deploying Hugh-alikes to distract their targeting reticules, respectively. As Diana's puzzles grow more elaborate, you'll be using as many tools for delay and distraction as you can. However, your choice of weapon might not always come down to the difficulty of the hacking puzzle that hovers in front of you. In reality, the smartest plays will come from whatever utilities you have and sequencing them according to the pair's aim, hack, destroy loop. That means locking enemies down however you can, weakening them through hacks, then committing to high damage bursts. Ammo, spatial awareness, positioning, timing, it all contributes to the game's cerebral rhythm. But the key thing remains: decision making. Yet, despite these symbiotic, multi-layered systems, Pragmata rarely punishes restraint. Diana's various hacking nodes are consumables, yes, but they're plentiful enough that you're encouraged to use them freely rather than hoard them in your inventory Resident Evil style. Still, the most effective strategy will likely be to keep your most powerful nodes in reserve, meaning resource management, in whatever shape it ultimately takes, will be more about recognizing which enemies are worth using a power-up, and which can be blasted cleanly without the extra investment. This is real-time optimization, and is another example of the game's rapid-fire problem-solving, intellectual skills you'll depend on when waves of enemies become increasingly numerous. In officially captured footage showcasing the events shortly after the game's sketchbook demo, you'll see boss fights which stretch these intertwined combat systems even further. The same core loop applies, albeit grander in scale with tension heightened. Here, these robotic colossi bring more aggressive behaviors, outlandish maneuvers, and increasingly complex defensive systems over the game's more standard opponents. And throughout these battles, you'll need to adapt your approach, prioritizing evasion, reading patterns, ascending the environment, and so on. In a way, it's all about composure now, which is a skill that you've been honing every time you enter one of Diana's puzzle minigames while taking fire anyway. Another noticeable feature of this official preview footage is the tight linear corridors of the demo open up to expansive arenas. Taking the form of a digitally replicated Times Square, this wider environment reinforces the game's combat mix. Breadth of space means more angles to cover, more threats to track, and more opportunities to lose control of a fight. Spatial awareness and positioning, elements that we've been banging on about throughout this entire feature, become just as vital here as successful hacks and firearm accuracy. By this point, you can probably think of these as soft skills, moving fluidly through the environment, taking up the most opportune positions, and firing with speed and precision. These are typical of third-person shooters, but alone, as this feature continually points out, they are not going to bring success. Important, yes, but Pragmata is presenting something relatively unexplored for the genre. Shooting, hacking, positioning, they all carry weight, but it's your decision-making, more often than not under duress, that is the determining factor here. Pragmata is a game that balances raw instinct with controlled thinking, asking you to assess, process, adapt, and execute under constant pressure. It's not necessarily about being faster or more accurate than the game. It's about being more composed, knowing when to commit, when to pull back, and how to multitask numerous priorities at once. If this balance holds up across the full experience, Pragmata could end up feeling less like a traditional action game and more like a constant, real-time exercise in problem solving.
And that'll be about it for this one. If you guys like what we're doing at GamingBolt, please consider subscribing to our channel, and I'll see you guys on the next video.